This episode is brought to you by Hasa. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the bottom feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, welcome to the Best of the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, Bob Lowry is going to go over some mistakes you're going to make with your free chlorine level. He'll talk about the 7.5% ratio cyanuric acid to free chlorine. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy Coaching Program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support. From me, I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. Let's talk about some problem pools here. You know, I get this all the time from, I don't know, I don't see the pools myself, but people will email me or text and say they have this pool, they're just putting in tons of chlorine, 2 gallons a day, 3 gallons a day. Maybe it's not that large of a pool, 10,000 gallons or 8,000 gallons. And it's just not holding chlorine. They've checked, the nitrates. There's no nitrates reading on the test strip, which is probably the only way to test in most cases, right? And so what would you say? I mean, they say the filter's been cleaned, but the pool is just not turning around and it's not holding chlorine and it's just becoming a problem pool. What would be the main issue they should look at when they get a pool like that?
Well, I think a pool that's using a lot of chlorine, you need to be a bit of a detective, if you will. A lot of times it can be the homeowner's fault. And it's something that either the homeowner's doing or one of the workmen around the house is doing, that they are cleaning something in the pool. They're blowing. When they mow the grass clippings are getting into the pool. When the guy next door is fertilizing, something is dropping into the pool. They can also have a pool that's surrounded by vegetation or landscaping. And that stuff is dropping into the pool, and everything that comes into the pool is organic, and it needs to be oxidized. Pools, they look great. People want a pool to look sometimes like a jungle and stuff, and while that looks cool, everything that's on that plant, as soon as it rains or gets some water on it, it drips into the pool. And the wind blows and blows all the spores and everything else off of that, and it gets in the pool. You need to look at the environment and perhaps even what's going on. We had a commercial pool, we found out that the guy that was washing the deck at night turned around, just took the hose and washed the deck, but he hosed it off, so the rinse water from the deck ran into the pool. So everything that was on the deck hit the pool, and it would use up all of the chlorine. They'd start out in the morning with 0 chlorine. I think, first of all, you need to be a detective. And even bather loads, you may find out that all of a sudden, this pool has become the neighborhood spot for kids, and on Saturday afternoon or 5 o'clock, 2 or 3 days a week, they get 10 or 20 kids in the pool. So I think you need to be aware of all of those kinds of uses first. And you can start to then look at what's using up the chlorine, and it could be just something that somebody either put in the pool or thought they were doing good or something and dumped something into the pool. We had a guy that was using the pool to clean his tools, and he would clean his tools with some kind of a cleaner, and then go dip them in the pool to rinse them off, and you get whatever solvent he was using into the pool, and solvent uses up chlorine like crazy, and it doesn't go very far away. So there's things like that. There's also the fact that you could have a biofilm that's growing someplace. You could have an algae bloom. By the time you see algae, it's really colonized and already mature, because many times algae gets started, you can't even see it. You only get to see it when it builds on top of itself and gets dense enough that it's no longer transparent. It's pretty mature by the time you see it. So you could have algae in the pool. You could have a high cyanuric acid level, and in which case you got so much cyanuric acid in the pool, the chlorine is not able to do everything. So there is this thing they call chlorine lock, which chlorine lock kind of means that it locks up the chlorine so it doesn't work. But what I'm saying is it locks up a lot of the chlorine, so not very much of it is working.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that. You can have a high cyanuric acid level. And also, once something starts to grow, it does have then a chlorine demand. And so if you have algae in the pool, you not only need chlorine to get rid of the algae, but you do need chlorine to get back to a good chlorine reading. It is possible, as you probably have noticed if you've been servicing pools, you probably noticed that sometimes you add a lot of chlorine and only get a little reading. And the reason is that you can actually have a negative chlorine demand. What that means is you could add an amount of chlorine just to get back to zero. And that happens a lot, where you've got something growing in the pool that's used up all the chlorine, and then there's a negative demand, and you may need 10 parts per million of chlorine just to get back to zero. You're going to need 10 to get another reading. So, it could take a lot of chlorine to do that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, because right now I'm doing some painting around the house, and I noticed that when I'm painting over a darker color, you can still kind of see it. So you're going to need more than one coat to cover it. And probably the same concept with the pool that has a negative chlorine demand. You can need more of it to cover it, and then finally you'll get it to where all the dark color of the paint is gone. And that's something that you don't think about often, but I have seen pools where you pour in a ton of chlorine and then you do the reading and you're only getting like 1 or 2 parts per million when it should be 20. So that does happen.
If they suspect that, one of the remedies is to get a very high chlorine level, but keep it that way for 24 to 48 hours. And then let the chlorine level go back down. So you run the chlorine level up to maybe 25 parts per million, or 40% of CYA, whichever is a higher number, and put that in the pool. But after you put in the 25 ppm, 2 hours later, check it and make sure you still have 25 ppm. And if you don't, add more chlorine to get back up to 25. And keep doing that until you get a chlorine level that doesn't drop. And that usually takes 24 to 48 hours. And when you do that, then you've killed everything in the pool. Mm-hmm. Or oxidized it. So that is something that you may want to consider. Also, one of the really big things that they did a study on in England was that if they got bathers to just rinse off, not take a shower with soap and water, but just rinse off before they get in the pool, they actually saved almost 60% of the chlorine bill by getting the bather just to rinse off. Because you've got all that sunblock and sweat and all that stuff on your body, and if you rinse that off before you get in, then chlorine doesn't have to work on it.
Yeah, that'd be a good invention for commercial pools, having like a shower right by the step area so that everyone gets soaked.
You could have a shower there. You could even have what they call a sun shower there, where you could have perhaps a reservoir or a bag of water that the sun warmed up, so that you're not taking a cold shower. You're kind of getting maybe a lukewarm shower before you get in.
And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description. Another question I get often is, I've got a pool, I test the chlorine, it's showing 3, 4, 5 parts per million, but I'm still getting algae on the steps, the deep end. I can't get rid of the algae in the pool. What can I do to get rid of that? It seems like a permanent fixture in the pool.
Well, and this is true. What happens is we get so much cyanuric acid in the pool that we don't have enough chlorine to prevent algae. Well, I actually have formulas and stuff to show how much chlorine you need in your pool, and the math is a little hard to do without seeing it. But you know that 3% of the chlorine that's in the pool is the part that's free to kill anything. And you might remember that at a pH of 7.5, that only 50% of your chlorine was in the killing form of chlorine called HOCl, right? HOCl, hypochlorous acid. And so that means that only 1.5% of your chlorine's in the killing form. And that means that if you had 2 parts per million of chlorine in the pool times 1.5% is only 0.03 parts per million of HOCl. And what we found, and I've researched this till I'm tired of researching it, is you need about 0.05 parts per million of HOCl to kill algae. If you're only keeping 2 parts per million of chlorine in your pool, you haven't got enough chlorine to kill the algae. The industry standard, and Leslie's and everybody else, says that you need 2 to 4 parts per million of chlorine in your pool. And what I say is that doesn't always work. And the reason it doesn't always work is because of that math I just gave you. And so one of the things that I tell people is, if you want to know how much chlorine you need in your pool, the answer is you need 7.5% of your cyanuric acid level. And so whatever your cyanuric acid level is, you need 7.5% of it to prevent algae. If you've got 50 parts per million of cyanuric acid, you're going to need almost 4 parts per million of chlorine in your pool, not 2. So 2 won't do it, but 4 will. So you need to be aware of that. But once you get algae, you can use an algicide and brush, and you can buy all these kinds of algicide and stuff like that. But a minute ago, I mentioned to you about running the chlorine level up to either 25 parts per million or 40% of cyanuric acid. And what I'm saying is that works great for killing algae. And so if you get the level up, you have to maintain that level. So you can't just run it up and then a day later, go back to using the pool. You have to check it and make sure that whenever the chlorine level drops down by more than 1 or 2 ppm, that you bring it back up so that you maintain 25 parts per million of chlorine for at least 24 or maybe 48 hours if the algae's been there for a long time. But once you kill the algae and it's gone, now you've got a pool that's completely disinfected with no algae in it. And if you keep 7.5% of CYA as the free chlorine level in your pool, you'll never have algae growing in it again.
And I think one of the points of that, and I think we've talked about that many a times, and I would like to nail that into people's heads, that this is really crucial in pool maintenance. And if you do pool service, and let's say you're there on a Wednesday and someone has a party on a Saturday or Sunday, and then the pool zeroes out, or maybe it's at 1 part per million on Monday and Tuesday, those 2 days are enough with the chlorine level below the level necessary for algae to grow in there, for the water to turn pretty quickly. And so it's a consistent level every day, every time you're testing the pool, right?
Yes, that's right. especially in the summer, if you get a little wind blowing and stuff like that, you're going to get algae spores in the pool, and they pop open and start growing because there's plenty of sunlight, there's plenty of food in the pool for them, and there's no chlorine. So you can get chlorine, you can get algae growing in a day or two. And that's even one of the reasons with a startup, on day 3, we want to start getting some chlorine in there.
If you're looking for other podcasts, just go to my website, swimmingforlearning.com. On the banner is a podcast icon. There'll be a drop-down menu with over 1,900 podcasts for you there to listen to at your leisure. And if you're interested in the coaching program, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week. God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.